All right. Hello, everybody. We're just a couple minutes past the hour, so we might as well get going. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So this is actually the first in our series of live recorded podcasts that we're going to be doing. I'll talk towards the end about the next one that we have planned in August. But today we're here with Professor Angela Sazza. I did my best to pronounce that correctly. I probably got it a little bit wrong, but so Angela and I have been having a lot of conversations lately about some of the topics that we're going to cover. And I just kind of flashed this up here. I'll take this off the screen shortly just to kind of remind everybody of who Angela is. So she's one of the leading experts in the world on behavioral approaches to human-centered security. And so we're going to be covering a few topics with her from her research and from some practical applications. But so that I don't butcher Angela's background, maybe Angela, I can kind of hand it over to you, and maybe you can talk a bit about what you focus on and what your work is to kind of get us started.
I've been working on IT security research for 25 years now. And my background is in human-computer interaction. So I studied both psychology and computer science. And I stumbled into security as an area that needed help. Needed a human-centered approach when I was working with a big telecoms company in the UK in the late 90s, and they said, hey, can you please come and look at why, and I have to say, sorry, it's a not very polite way, but this was the way they put it. Can you please tell us why these stupid users, meaning their own employees, can't remember their passwords? And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And we started looking at, and it turned out that this was not because the security people themselves thought they had a problem, but they were getting heat from the accountants that basically said, look, you're employing more and more people on these help desks to reset passwords, and the numbers tripled every year for the past 3 years, and it can't go on. Stop it. And yeah, if you think about the cost that was involved in that, it was really quite stunning. They were employing 100 people in a call center that did nothing all day long but reset passwords. So you can see the accountant's point. And well, when we looked at it, so we went out and we did what as human-centered people you normally do is you go and talk to the employees and say like, hey, tell me, what's your experience with passwords? And so we did some interviews. We set up an online questionnaire about it, and I was I've never seen so many people fill in a questionnaire so quickly. And after 2 days, this was, we're talking about the late 90s, after 2 days, 200 people had responded to that questionnaire, and the boxes weren't big enough. We left some free comment boxes that weren't big enough. People were writing, and you could just feel the frustration and the anger. And really, so basically after the brief, like, can't you do a quick study and tell us why these stupid people can't remember their passwords? I had to go back to the company and say, like, because you're asking your employees to do something that is not humanly possible. You can't have between 16 and 64 different complex passwords and 6-digit PINs that you change every month and expect people to cope with this. And that's really how it started, you know, and it was like a very, very salutary lesson in that if you're asking employers to do something in the context of that's not possible to do security, but do it in a way that's not possible in the context of your everyday work, then, well, guess what? You know, they're not going to comply. And they're going to develop a very, very negative view of security. And that's really not happening.
There's a lot in there to unpack, Angela. It's a great story, actually, and a great start to obviously a great career in this space. So you talked about these stupid users. You talked about the cost of actually handling password resets. You talked about engagement from these said users and how they responded to the questions you were asking. I think engagement that many security awareness professionals would dream of having in the typical sort of security awareness scenarios today. And you also talked a bit about friction with everyday work, which is also an interesting topic for us to dig into. So plenty to go there. So just starting from the top, the language of that people use, especially security professionals use, with regard to the so-called stupid users and some of the frustration that's kind of built into that. Any thoughts on what you are seeing in the industry and how people talk about users with regard to secure behavior?
Mm. Yeah, it's obvious, you know, obviously if you want people to respect security and to really engage with it, you know, it's got to be a valuable, you know, or at least a decent proposition to them. So really a positive, you know, I always advise, you know, have a positive language. You know, the way you speak about users, it's really good practice to not engage, you know, in sort of what we often observe is a bit like that some security people like to bond with each other by bashing the users, you know. It's a very, very common phenomenon in psychology, in group, out group, and that really is not helpful, you know. It's a good idea to see them as a respectful partner. I mean, in some companies, we've really had this, you know, sort of this first paper I published based on the study I just talked about was users are not the enemy, right? And so your staff, they are not the enemy when it comes to security. The enemy is the attackers out there, and you want a positive, you know, you want to form a positive team, you know, working together. You want everybody, all the good guys on the inside to work together, and that sort of respect and being very clear about, you know, responsibilities, who's got responsibility for that, and communicating in a very clear and positive manner to your staff about what they are expected to do for security. It's a very good first step, you know, and sort of like demonizing sanctions and so on, that's really been shown time and time again doesn't work.
Yeah, and we still see that quite frequently, right? Because the goal of a lot of security awareness programs is to show completion, to show that, yes, we've trained, we've done this. So, so like when we're working on our RFP or going through our compliance audit, we can show at least some kind of positive result. But then in achieving that goal, sometimes you have to sanction users or take away their access even, or do something punitive. So you're saying that that's actually, even though it achieves that compliance goal, that's not a good approach to take, huh?
Well, I think, I mean, it's one of the things we always say is like in line, you know, following General MacArthur's, you know, dictum, you know, never give an order that can't be obeyed. It's very important. You know, you should make sure that what you're telling people in the training is actually possible to do. And if if they aren't doing it, go and find out. And sometimes it may need, you may need to change the way that security is implemented. You may actually need to go and for instance, if we're talking about passwords and things, we're still seeing very, very often that the identity and access management, is just not modern and not well done. And so that makes it very, very difficult. So that would be, sort of look at, are you really making it easy for everybody, for staff in the company to do the right thing by security? If you're doing that, and then people you have individuals who just can't be bothered, and so on, then I think, yes, I mean, there need to be sanctions when employees willfully and repeatedly don't follow the policy, and put the company at risk. There's no point in having policies if at the end of the day you're not prepared to enforce them. But the first question, should always be like, why aren't you doing this? What is the and understanding why people aren't complying. And we always find it's like there's usually, there is friction, there is a problem. There's the worry that really staff see themselves in a situation where the loss of productivity seems to them the bigger threat to them and their personal situation, that they're not performing enough and performing well enough, and that they're fearing security is getting in the way and slowing them down. And of course, that needs to be addressed and needs to be just made very clear.
Right. Yeah. What is so in terms of kind of security creating friction, right? With the business, the day-to-day business, right, that users have to conduct. What's the best practice that you've seen in terms of trying to identify and address those points of friction in companies?
It's a three-way conversation. I mean, first of all, it's like going, as safety security, going and talking to staff, talking to employees is never a bad thing. And go, but don't be, you want to go with a very big pair of ears to start with, rather than going and talking about the policy, really listen very carefully when they say something. And sometimes it may be, sometimes there really is a change that needs to be made, better integration of security in the business process. And that's then a three-way conversation with line management or with the business owners about doing something. Sometimes it can be a misconception or a misunderstanding, that there is some myth lodged there about, oh, we have to do this extra step, but really it isn't very important, or really that this risk doesn't really apply to us. And in that case, then it is a question of education, of basically making clear that the risk is real, or that the risk would be material. And if change, when you're introducing security, you're asking people to follow it. If they have to change their behavior, change is always work in the early stages when you're changing it. And then excuses can sometimes come in quite handy for people if they want to, they want to reduce complexity for themselves by saying like, oh, no, this doesn't really apply to me. I don't have to, to do this. I don't have to embark on the journey of changing my highly learned routine that I do every day. And then if they're using such excuses, like saying, oh, it doesn't really apply here, or, and sometimes we still, after all these decades, we still hear statements like, well, I'm not really very important. I don't have a lot of power, so I wouldn't be a target. My email account wouldn't be a target. And then you have to basically bust that myth and go in and say, like, any employee's email account in a company is valuable. If it gets compromised, this really increases the risk, right, across the board. And then people need to understand that if somebody breaks into your email account, they can now impersonate you, and they can, they can read your email, and they can see who you've just talked to, what about, and now they can start, tricking those people with very plausible, very nicely crafted emails and so on. That understanding of risks and how attackers work still isn't there.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's all about kind of having that risk appreciation, isn't it? And I just want to make a quick break to the flow because we're getting and sort of a service announcement, I guess. The benefit of doing these podcast recordings live is that people who are listening in can participate. And we have some really interesting comments here from Danny Dresner. Thank you, Danny. So I'm just going to read this out because I think I'd like to get, Angela, your reaction to what Danny wrote here. So Danny writes, hi, Angela and Lev. Do you think we should start all of these so-called awareness sessions with an apology that we expect people to compensate for the security failings of the technology we expect them to use, and by proxy protect the beneficiaries or victims by guarding their information or bank accounts, power supplies, purified water on which they rely? It's interesting. Start with an apology. What are your thoughts?
I hope that a lot of, I'm afraid that is right. A lot of security solutions that people have to deal with are, they're cumbersome and they're difficult, and they create extra work just because there was a not very well designed, not very well secured system in the first place, and then we started putting on sticky plaster security. That really is ethical. If we have those, then yeah, we should apologize for those and come up with a clear timeline for fixing that and removing it, and just say we just need you to bear with us, whilst we get an easier to use, a system that doesn't burden you so much in place. I think we've seen a lot of change, the whole issue, I started with passwords, and now in many companies we are seeing multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication solutions that are much easier to use, and also where you're, you have the added benefit that not only it's easier to log in, it's quicker and more straightforward to log in, but it gives you additional protection against phishing, phishing emails, because if a particular website isn't registered with your, or password managers, are quite widely deployed, and they have a lot of benefits and are easy to use. But clearly, there's still work to do. I personally, I think if I look at how I now authenticate to my banks, I think in the role of consumers, we've seen quite a lot of positive change in that we're given secure and easy to use solutions. At least I'd say it's the case in the UK and in Europe.
Yeah, and I think for the most part in the US as well. So how do we coming back to the topic of behavior enablement, I guess, right? There's a lot of theory. I've read some of your papers and some other papers you've pointed me to on this, and there's a lot to be said about really moving a whole organization to inject secure behaviors into the culture. Some of the more commonly known topics, and I think you meant like nudge theory, you mentioned that could be like a whole discussion unto itself, concordance, self-efficacy. Can you, and I don't know if it makes sense to show that security behavior curve that you've pointed me to before as a reference, but can you step us through like how you would go from just doing basic security awareness to actually moving the needle on behavior change in the organization?
Maybe we can start by some very simple important sort of ground rules that we have to have. So awareness and a lot of what comes under the awareness banner at the moment is it's information. It's basically just transmitting information to employees, whether that's about risks or it's about what does the secure behavior look like. But what, at the end of the day, what we have in a working environment is people who are very, very efficient because they have developed a whole set of habitual behaviors or of routines that they execute. That's really what makes us as human beings fantastically efficient, is that about 80 to 90% of our behavior is this kind of routine behavior. We don't really consciously think in a step-by-step fashion. You know, we see, we get a cue, we respond to something, and we execute the whole behavior. That's great. That's fantastic. And for those of you who've seen the System 1, System 2, you know, thinking fast and slow that Daniel Kahneman talked about, this is essentially, this is the System 1. And that basically is, you know, it makes us very efficient, and it's not something we can't stop. Right? If we just say, like, you know, dear people, for the sake of security, please just don't do system, you know, come out of System 1 mode and do everything in a System 2 very deliberately, step by step. Think at every step about the risks and whether this is the right behavior. I mean, the productivity loss we would suffer is a far bigger existential threat to companies than most cybersecurity threats, actually. So the actual, I think that the first real important insight is that we need secure behavior needs to be embedded in the routines that we do, and we need to make it a routine. And for that, just telling people, you know, the whole behavioral science, behavioral economics research we've seen over the past 20 years has very, very clearly shown that, you know, that just by telling people to change behavior, you're not going to change their behavior. You need it to embed it. It needs to become a routine and be embedded. And that requires more than just giving information and just making people aware of risks and aware of what the right behavior is. You need to get them, you need to support them through that behavior change.
It puts a different spin on training, doesn't it? Because like when you think of training, like typical, I guess, security awareness training is just sort of presentation of material. Like you said, it's just awareness, knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think of training, like in a military sense, let's say, it's drills, it's like constant repetition, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's
but the good thing is you need to do that repetition only this repetition needs to just happen often enough over the initial period of time. Once it's become automatic, then it isn't a burden to the person anymore. It's just really getting through that phase of pushing out the old insecure behavior and replacing it with the new secure behavior. And that's where people need extra support. And this is something I always say is companies can plan for this. You know, I mean, obviously you don't try and introduce a change like that at your busiest time of year when people are, you know, working flat out of their feet. Just find the right, you know, finding the right time period to do this, when people can devote this extra effort to, you know, execute, you know, really doing this training and changing their routine, and also when they have the time to talk to each other, to remind each other of doing that, of that, you know, no, we don't do this anymore. It's just not secure. We need to behave like this now. This needs to be what we do if we want to be secure.
You know, the comment you just made about talking to each other and reminding each other makes one think of this notion that you see once in a while of people that are security champions within the organization. Do you find that that's an effective approach to identify those people and get their help?
It can, yeah, it can absolutely be very, you know, if you basically pick up the people who are interested and they become a sort of like a go-between between the security experts in the organization and their different departments. I think that can be a great approach. But it can't, you know, none of this can actually fix, you know, they can't by themselves change the whole landscape. You know, if otherwise, if the company isn't really supporting, not doing planning and support and resourcing certain changes that need to happen adequately, they can't compensate for that, but they can certainly be a great sort of catalyst and a bridge between, because also they can report, they are the good right people to report back when if something isn't working out.
Yes, that makes sense. Excuse me. There's a question in here from somebody anonymous, so don't know who it is, but it asks, does the threat of consequences to complacency have any effective value? And if so, what's the best possible method of communicating that?
If
Yeah,
it is really, well, it depends what you're asking. Are you the consequences? Consequences can be communicating about. Consequences can be effective if the reason for not sticking with the secure behavior really is complacency. But that's not what we're finding in our research, right? I mean, we are finding in our research very often that it isn't complacency, that there are really obstacles, you know, and there's friction and the fear of productivity that security just isn't done in a way that means they can behave in a secure way and still meet their productivity goals. You know, that's always something that first has to be addressed. You can't leave your staff to decide between productivity and security. That's something the company needs to decide, and then you need to make sure that the security you're asking for can be that secure behavior can be done and productivity goals can still be met. Once that is done, then it's like focus on supporting them through the change period. As I've said before, complacency would be if somebody really can't be bothered to change, even though the secure behavior is feasible, and even though colleagues are doing it so, and then you can, you know, threatening consequences in this set of sanctions if you're prepared to stick with them, yeah. If you're meaning talking about consequences for the company, if we aren't behaving in a secure way, yes, that is also, it's a good thing to do, because in my in my experience and in our research, you know, it's only a very, very small number of staff that are sociopaths and don't care if the company you know, suffers severe losses or gets hit. That is quite, you know, it's quite rare. And most people are, you know, once they understand what the consequences could be, you know, that can be an additional motivating threat. But as I've said before, like in my experience, it's very, it's not that people need motivating more. It's the adoption of the correct secure behavior needs to facilitate it more. They need more help to get through that phase.
Mm. Yeah, it's well, and the point that you make about the company deciding on the trade-off between sort of security friction and productivity versus leaving that decision up to every individual is a very interesting point. Because usually topics around employee productivity are very much kind of company decisions. So why should it be different in the case of security? But yeah, the complaint. I also wonder whether, like the comment or the way the question was worded with complacency, whether there's a bit of a language of blame in that as well, perhaps. or just sort of the presumption of complacency versus somebody who has repeatedly shown complacency, right,
Mm-hmm.
through their actions. Um, we're getting quite. This is a lot of comments in the panel. So,
Bring it on.
so if you don't mind, we'll get everybody that's listening and commenting involved. Um, So, in your experience, have you noticed any performance or competitive differences between organizations that get security right and frictionless versus organizations that are still trying to solve that problem?
It's definitely if you get security right and basically make it frictionless. Yeah, I mean, I've seen few companies basically achieve that, but it's also what I think what really sets them apart is first of all is that they have that open dialogue with their employees, and they talk to their employees about security and why they're doing it, and they listen to when employees say particular behaviors aren't possible, and then they work together to find solutions, of actually really making security and efficient and embedding it very often by talking to employees or talking to line managers and so on. Those good solutions can be found. I think the opposite that I see is like that is when you get this approach when the people up there don't really want to get involved. They don't want to have discussions. They also often don't even listen to their security experts, who might be pointing out the need for certain changes and so on. And they just say, as well, can't we'll just buy a training, I just want the minimum. I just want to tick the box to say I've trained people. And frankly, I don't care about whether the training is effective or not, as long as I can say I've done the training, I've done my, we can get the tick, and I've done my compliance, I think that's really, so coming back to your earlier question, is that really what sets the good organizations apart. They're in a post-compliance security area, right? They really want, they don't just want to preach certain behaviors and say like, well, all my employees can answer the question about how they should be doing security correctly, versus they want to be able to check that everybody is really behaving in a secure way, and that they are, and that's what most employees would do if they are able to, and if they basically had a chance to acquire the secure routine.
Yeah, yep. So yeah, it's and we kind of believe this as well at OutThink. I mean, the first presumption is of good intentions, right? That everyone's got good intentions. They're all trying to do their best. And like you said, there's probably very few who are psychopath enough to not care or
or the odd, you might have the odd person that's disaffected for other reasons, and not doing it. That's
True.
possible. But that's also, it's like by talking to your, having a good relationship and talking to employees, you should be able to find those and get rid of them before they can do more damage.
Right. Limit what people in the security world like to call the blast radius of people that might do damage. But yeah, not to use too many military examples. So Caroline Bonsraj here makes an interesting comment. It's rather long, but I'm just going to summarize. So basically, she's saying that we as security professionals have a combined responsibility to make cyber awareness a global movement, and to introduce security into people's day-to-day lives and become a learned behavior, because our own security is paramount. So, and what she's speaking to in the rest of the comment is kind of this crossover between being behaving securely for the company at work and for personal reasons at home, like with your family or just your personal finances and things like that. And I think a lot of folks kind of see that like the what's in it for them, for employees to kind of learn secure behaviors just for their own general cyber well-being. Do you see that as an important motivator that we should lean into?
Yeah, I think first of all, it simplifies, it reduces, if it's the same, if I can have the same behavior at home and at work, and in both cases I'm secure. That just makes it's one of those things that makes security easier. It reduces the complexity and the effort. If I only have to learn it once, and also I keep doing the secure behavior more, the more I do it, the more it gets embedded very clearly. Yes. And so it should, sort of in the old days when, sort of we're always said it's like, don't tell your employees if you want them to use a VPN for certain things, don't tell them to switch it on for, in particular cases and so on. Just do it. Just say whenever you connect to the company, you need to use the secure VPN. That's basically, as a routine, is much easier to acquire. And it's the same with like, do not reuse, you do not reuse a particular password, particularly not if it's not on a 2 or multi-factor account. Don't reuse your passwords ever. Don't do it at home. Don't do it at work. Don't use them. Use a password
Same
again.
password.
Don't use them from home work, and then and vice versa. You need for accounts that are important, you need unique passwords.
Yep. No, that totally makes sense. And some of the routines you kind of spoke to in that comment, I think are good examples of things that you can, or behaviors that you can turn into routine. There are a few comments here that are similar enough that I want to combine them. So Christian Bogdan and Bernadette Palmer both talking about how do you make management, business leadership own the security problem, right? And how do you make them invest not just after an incident, but proactively?
Oh, I hear you. This is I'm so with you. This is one of my, I find this, even in companies that come to me and me and other research colleagues and want to work with us. This is still, it's a huge issue, that they, if they have this compliant mindset and they don't, well, how do you make them? I think it's to get them to realize that this is not a technical, it's not just a technical and an expertise, a problem of limited expertise, but that most companies are in a, they're undergoing a transformation, and they have to find resources, they have to find capabilities and capacities to make security happen, to embed it, to transform the system and embed it in every day. And that it's a leadership issue. It's not a purely technical issue. It's not a purely security expert issue. It's a leadership issue. And, if you talk to them and say, like, what we need to do, what we're doing here, this is a change management problem. And if you go to the change management frameworks, the leadership is the first thing they will tell you about. So don't let them pigeonhole the problem as a technical one, or as a purely, security compliance one, but say this is the leadership issue. And maybe something that sometimes helps is if you point to and get them, ask them to the management to talk to colleagues in companies that were born digital. And there you see much more that this awareness is there in the leadership, right? And they embed it. And it's part of the fabric of everything they do. That secure behavior is ingrained, and maybe they can learn a bit by talking to them and realize that, unfortunately, if they're in a company that wasn't born digital, that there is a transformation job to be done, but that is the leadership's job to do.
And actually, to that end, one of the live podcasts that we're planning, I think it's September 10th, just for everybody to know, we're going to have somebody who was until recently a big business leader, multi-billion-dollar business, presenting or having a discussion with one of the former CISOs she used to work with, and kind of what is the general manager's perspective um, on the problem, right, and how it should be solved. And and it's interesting. Her name is Ursula Morgenstern, and it was interesting just talking like the flight altitude from which she was looking at the problem, and the brief discussion I had with her was totally different. And to her, like the security folks, the CISOs, like a bunch of techies in the back room in a way. I mean, maybe I'm misrepresented a little bit, but she, like it, and it's interesting to get that perspective from some business leaders. But I think it's probably true to say that most business leaders don't have a very proactive, informed perspective on this, at least in the non-digital native companies. So yeah, just maybe a small plug for September 10th session that we're doing. So we have actually, and I have myself some notes to come back to this, but also Monia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is also asking, can you please touch base on the factors that influence human behaviors? What's the science behind it? And then also how to adopt AI to run the security program, which I think may be a separate question, but maybe not. What are your thoughts on that?
Separately. So I've tried to really distill, there's some really great bits of research in behavioral science over the past 10, 20 years, and so we've mentioned already, mentioned Kahneman, BJ Fogg, and Richard Thaler and Sunstein, the nudges stuff. All of those things, if you look at what we can take from those and distill the most important points, is from the BJ Fogg is make sure your security is doable. It's not just about motivating your employees. You need to make sure they're actually able to do the behavior. That's a key thing. So once we go beyond that, it is supporting. There is a series sort of steps and that we can think of that will make it easier. Thank you. Yeah. So we're going to tell them about the risks, and we're going to tell them about the correct behavior. And once they understand, it can be helpful to actually get what we call concordance, is to actually getting them actively to commit to say, like, yes, I agree, this is necessary to protect the company, and I'm going to do my bit to do it. And that's sort of a thing where to really have the behavior, and not having an abstract policy, but like saying, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to adopt a password manager, or I'm going to switch to this token-based authentication scheme or something like that, and have really concrete behaviors written down to commit. And people can collect, employees can collect these like in little lists. And but I explicitly, what I do is I make them literally sign on the dotted line to this, that they want to change their behavior, that they're going to change it, and then they can keep that in a collection of secure behaviors they're going to adopt. We're also experimenting with, like, outside the work context, for people who want to have this in an app where they can pick one security after another. And you're saying, like, I want to do this, and maybe even set a goal, like, by this time, I want to really complete this in the next week, or in the next couple of weeks, I want to have switched, completely to do this. And just having that explicit step, to tell yourself And then also knowing, like, I have a list somewhere where I've put all those things down. That's a really important thing. In medicine, they've shown that by basically really having the behavior, having experts not handing down a behavior, and particularly not handing it down maybe in slightly abstract terms, but to really agree on what I am going to do differently now in order to achieve this goal that we've agreed on, we have in common, of keeping the company secure, that makes a big difference.
That makes sense.
You've checked, that I've understood this. Yeah, I've understood it, and I agree, and I want to do this, and I'm now just literally committing, having this explicit commitment to it. So that's what's called concordance. And the next bit that I think is quite important is if people need to be, most people, if they are confident that they can do something, they're much more likely to make the change than if they have doubts about whether they can do it. And this is where the ability to try the behavior out, try it in a particular protected environment, either with a lunch and learn, or that you're sitting down with a security champion and try it out, and having that experience, yes, I can do this. Those two things are really, really powerful first steps towards making sure that people actually will, helping people to really adopt behavior.
That makes sense. Self-efficacy. So yeah, and that's well, and we've had a lot of conversations about that. Obviously, that's it's hard to put in practice at scale. And I guess this is where having some technology that kind of helps you automate that, maybe an app, is important. The question about AI, I can make a quick comment on that if you wish. I just to kind of get us started, maybe. But one of the things that we have found in practice to be really valuable with AI is using it, especially with LLMs these days, right? Using it as a way to collect a lot of information from the employee base quickly, right? So when they do a small module, they can put in some, like the text box that you mentioned before, Angela, like comments about hey, this is hard for me to do because of whatever it is that I do at work daily. And actually our biggest customer has 240,000 employees that they've run this with, and they've found, so they get a lot of comments. You can't possibly process all of that as one person or even a small team. So the AI kind of helps them synthesize what's coming back, right? So that they can learn from that and see what they can do to adjust tools or processes. That's one approach where AI has proven helpful as a point solution in the process. Any other thoughts on that, Angela?
If you basically have communication channels that are used by the company, you can use it to also to watch out for you for complaints, or negativity that may be attached to certain policies or certain security tools or systems that people are using. I think if we'd had this 10, 15 years ago, maybe SharePoint would have gone sooner.
Ouch.
You would have cottoned on to, just how, how desperate, it is, or they would have maybe taken an approach like how it's implemented and how you do things differently, So that I think it can, and particularly sort of if if you have your own data, then about what your employees are doing, are saying, are commenting on, that can be quite valuable just to pick up, where are the pain points where are the obstacles, but also is what are the most frequently asked questions, and because that's then if you address the frequently asked questions in your security communications to your employees, if you're answering their questions, they're much more receptive, they're very likely to be receptive, and grateful. And I think that's actually how I like to think about that really in a company with a healthy security culture. It's part of the discourse, right? It's part of the dialogue. I'm really worried when I go in a company and I never don't see any evidence of employees talking to each other about security. It is just part. It's part. We're in a we're working in digital environments. All our value is there. That's where the threat is, and it should be part of our conversation, and that should be an ongoing dialogue. About how we are protecting. How how are we being attacked? Where are the risks, and how are we working together to protect?
Yeah, it should be much easier to talk about that, actually. Right now, it seems like I don't know, most companies, that's not like a subject of lunchtime conversation, just organically, for sure. And it is an important topic that I feel like it's maybe a little bit taboo almost to talk about at work. I don't know, just my perception.
Can be if people are worried about, about if they feel insecure and are worried about that they're doing that, or if they're worried about the sanctions thing and so on. And that's sort of like coming back to, why it's important to make it a positive, just make it as something that's positive, that's natural, it's a sensible thing we all do.
Well, I'm looking at the clock. We're going to do 45-minute session, ran over a little bit, but I do want to keep it to a reasonable time and fit it into the hour that we have blocked out. But really good content here. I think. Thank you again, Angela, for sharing your views. I mean, some of the key points that I pulled out actually, and there are many. So just one that really stood out for me is this kind of system one, system two thinking. I actually hadn't picked up on that precisely in past conversations, the Kahneman reference. But if we're doing 80% of what we do daily by routine, it's really hard to break into that routine. And even if you make everybody appreciate the risks that we all face. And I think with the news today, we all see it. Everyone knows it's risky. You can get phished. You can cause a breach. But changing that routine, that's a tough challenge that we all have to kind of work on together.
I think it's just about, I find like, once basically companies have picked up on that, then it's, and they're committing to it, then it starts to become, I'm not saying it's definitely not trivial, but it's doable, and many companies, maybe it's also helpful to remind themselves that we've achieved a lot of transformations in the Western world, in our organizations and organizational culture. The whole, if you look between the 80s and now, workplace safety has become, it's embedded, it's a routine, and I always sort of having a little giggle fit, when I'm in certain companies and they tell me not to walk down the stairs without, holding the handrail and or certain things. This has become that transformation has been there since the late 80s, early 90s, and also how we've changed our language of how we basically we don't talk in derogatory terms about minorities, about we don't use offensive language and so on. And those transformations have really been achieved in most companies in fairly short periods of time. So I think that's. And also, if you talk to your business leadership about it, that hopefully it would give them, it would give them a sense of like that they feel it's possible, a sense of self-efficacy. Guys,
Right.
can do this.
Right. Right. It's been done before. That's a very good point. Step back and to see that other transformations of similar ilk and um, gravity have taken place. Well, that's a great place to end the discussion. On a positive note, we can do it. It's not just the security team's problem, it is an overall leadership problem. And there's a lot of routine that we have to break through in order to change, to really inject secure behaviors. That's excellent. Great. Thank you so much again for taking the time, Angela, and thanks everybody for tuning in and for all the comments and questions that you've shared. And we'll be back. Our next session actually is in August 20th. I think 1 hour earlier than this one. It's also a live recording of a podcast. And we're going to have 2 CISOs, one from Anglo Gold Ashanti in South Africa, a mining company, and the other from Epicor, which is a mining technology company that provides technology solutions to mining companies. So it's kind of in the mining space, I suppose, but an interesting combination of issues for folks like that in manufacturing and with a lot of employees that are not at their desk, with a lot of risk that is not through email per se. So interesting environment for us to kind of learn from. So that's our next session, August 20th. And then we have the one that I mentioned with the business leader and the CISO on September 10th. And then we'll talk about the others coming the next time that we record one. So again, thank you, Angela, for lending your time, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. All right.
And
Bye-bye.
for all the good questions. Thank you. Bye.